Welcome back. Today we'll be picking up in Prince Caspian with Chapter 5, Caspian's Adventure in the Mountains. After this, Caspian and his tutor had many more secret conversations on the top of the great tower, and at each conversation Caspian learned more about old Narnia, so that thinking and dreaming about the old days and longing that they might come back filled nearly all his spare hours. But of course he had not many hours to spare, for now his education was beginning in earnest. He learned sword fighting and riding, swimming and diving, how to shoot with the bow and play on the recorder and the theorbo, how to hunt the stag and cut him up when he was dead, besides cosmography, rhetoric, heraldry, versification, and of course history, with a little law, physic, alchemy, and astronomy. Of magic he learned only the theory, for Dr. Cornelius said the practical part was not a proper study for princes, and I myself, he added, am only a very imperfect magician and can do only the smallest experiments. Of navigation, which is a noble and heroical act, said the doctor, he was taught nothing, because King Miraz disapproved of ships and the sea. He also learned a great deal by using his own eyes and ears. As a little boy he had often wondered why he disliked his aunt, Queen Prunaprismia. He now saw that it was because she disliked him. He also began to see that Narnia was an unhappy country. The taxes were high and the laws were stern, and Miraz was a cruel man. After some years there came a time when the queen seemed to be ill, and there was a great deal of bustle and pother about her in the castle, and doctors came and the courtiers whispered. This was in early summertime. And one night, while all this fuss was going on, Caspian was unexpectedly awakened by Dr. Cornelius after he had been only a few hours in bed. "Are we going to do a little astronomy, doctor?" said Caspian. "Hush," said the doctor. "Trust me and do exactly as I tell you. Put on all your clothes. You have a long journey before you." Caspian was very surprised, but he had learned to have confidence in his tutor, and he began doing what he was told at once. When he was dressed, the doctor said, "I have a wallet for you. We must go into the next room and fill it with victuals from your highness's supper table." "But my gentlemen in waiting will be there," said Caspian. "They are fast asleep and will not awake," said the doctor. "I am a very minor magician, but I can at least contrive to charm sleep." They went into the antechamber, and there, sure enough, the two gentlemen in waiting were sprawled on chairs and snoring hard. Dr. Cornelius quickly cut up the remains of a cold chicken and some slices of venison and put them, with bread and an apple or so and a little flask of good wine, into the wallet, which he then gave to Caspian. It fitted on by a strap over Caspian's shoulder, like a satchel you would use for taking books to school. "Have you your sword?" asked the doctor. "Yes," said Caspian. "Then put this mantle over all to hide the sword in the wallet. That's right. And now we must go to the great tower and talk." When they had reached the top of the tower, it was a cloudy night, not at all like the night when they had seen the conjunction of Tarva and Allenville. Dr. Cornelius said, "Dear Prince, you must leave this castle at once and go to seek your fortune in the wide world. Your life is in danger here." "Why?" asked Caspian. "Because you are the true king of Narnia, Caspian the 10th, the true son and heir of Caspian the 9th. Long life to your majesty." And suddenly, to Caspian's great surprise, the little man dropped down on one knee and kissed his hand. "What does it all mean? I don't understand," said Caspian. "I wonder you have never asked me before," said the doctor. "Why, being the son of King Caspian, you are not King Caspian yourself. Everyone except your majesty knows that Miraz is your super. When he first began to rule, he did not even pretend to be the king. He called himself Lord Protector. But then your royal mother died, the good queen and the only Telmarine who was ever kind to me. And then, one by one, all the great lords who had known your father died or disappeared. Not by accident, either. Miraz weeded them out. Belshazzar and Euphalus were shot with arrows on a hunting party. By chance, it was pretended. All the great house of the Passerids he sent to fight giants on the northern frontier, till one by one they fell. Arlian and Erman and a dozen more he executed for treason on a false charge. The two brothers of Beaver's Dam he shut up as madmen. And finally he persuaded the 7 noble lords, who alone among all the Telmarines did not fear the sea, to sail away and look for new lands beyond the eastern ocean. And as he intended, they never came back. And when there was no one left who could speak a word for you, then his flatterers, as he had instructed them, begged him to become king, and of course he did." "Do you mean he now wants to kill me too?" said Caspian. "That is almost certain," said Dr. Cornelius. "But why now?" said Caspian. "I mean, why didn't he do it long ago if he wanted to? And what harm have I done him?" He has changed his mind about you because of something that happened only 2 hours ago. The queen has had a son." "I don't see what that's got to do with it," said Caspian. "Don't see!" exclaimed the doctor. "Have all my lessons in history and politics taught you no more than that? Listen. As long as he had no children of his own, he was willing enough that you should be king after he died. He may not have cared much about you, but he would rather you should have the throne than a stranger. Now that he has a son of his own, he will want his own son to be the next king. You are in the way. He'll clear you out of the way." "Is he really as bad as that?" said Caspian. "Would he really murder me?" "He murdered your father," said Dr. Cornelius. Caspian felt very queer and said nothing. "I can tell you the whole story," said the doctor, "but not now. There is no time. You must fly at once." "You'll come with me?" said Caspian. "I dare not," said the doctor. "It would make your danger greater. 2 are more easily tracked than 1. Dear Prince, dear King Caspian, you must be very brave. You must go alone and at once. Try to get across the southern border to the court of King Nain of Archenland. He will be good to you." "Shall I never see you again?" said Caspian in a quavering voice. "I hope so, dear king," said the doctor. "What friend have I in the wide world except your majesty? And I have a little magic, but in the meantime, speed is everything. Here are 2 gifts before you go. This is a little purse of gold. Alas, all the treasure in this castle should be your own by rights. And here is something far better." He put in Caspian's hand something which he could hardly see, but which he knew by the feel to be a horn. "That," said Dr. Cornelius, "is the greatest and most sacred treasure of Narnia. Many terrors I endured, many spells did I utter to find it when I was still young. It is the magic horn of Queen Susan herself, which she left behind her when she vanished from Narnia at the end of the Golden Age. It is said that whoever blows it shall have strange help. No one can say how strange. It may have power to call Queen Lucy and King Edmund and Queen Susan and the High King Peter back from the past, and they will set all to rights. It may be that it will call up Aslan himself. Take it, King Caspian, but do not use it except at your greatest need. And now, haste, haste, haste. The little door at the very bottom of the tower, the door into the garden, is unlocked. Then we must part." "Can I get my horse Destrier?" asked Caspian. "He is already saddled and waiting for you, just at the corner of the orchard." During the long climb down the winding staircase, Cornelius whispered many more words of direction and advice. Caspian's heart was sinking, but he tried to take it all in. Then came the fresh air in the garden, a fervent handclasp with the doctor, a run across the lawn, a welcoming whinny from Destrier, and so King Caspian X left the castle of his fathers. Looking back, he saw fireworks going up to celebrate the birth of the new prince. All night he rode southward, choosing byways and bridle paths through woods as long as he was in country that he knew. But afterwards he kept to the high road. Destrier was excited as his master at this unusual journey, and Caspian, though tears had come into his eyes at saying goodbye to Dr. Cornelius, felt brave and in a way happy to think that he was King Caspian riding to seek adventures, with his sword on his left hip and Queen Susan's magic horn on his right. But when day came, with a sprinkle of rain, and he looked about him and saw on every side unknown woods, wild heaths, and blue mountains, he thought how large and strange the world was, and felt frightened and small. As soon as it was full daylight, he left the road and found an open grassy place amid a wood where he could rest. He took off Destrier's bridle and let him graze, ate some cold chicken and drank a little wine, and presently fell asleep. It was late afternoon when he awoke. He ate a morsel and continued his journey, still southward, by many unfrequented lanes. He was now in a land of hills, going up and down, but always more up than down. From every ridge he could see the mountains grow bigger and blacker ahead. As the evening closed in, he was riding their lower slopes. The wind rose. Soon rain fell in torrents. Destrier became uneasy. There was thunder in the air. And now they entered a dark and seemingly endless pine forest, and all the stories Caspian had ever heard of trees being unfriendly to man crowded into his mind. He remembered that he was, after all, a Telmarine, one of the race who would cut down trees wherever they could, and were at war with all wild things. And though he himself might be unlike other Telmarines, the trees could not be expected to know this. Nor did they. The wind became a tempest, the woods roared and creaked all round him. There came a crash. A tree fell right across the road just behind him. "Quiet, Destrier, quiet," said Caspian, patting his horse's neck. But he was trembling himself and knew that he escaped death by an inch. Lightning flashed and a great crack of thunder seemed to break the sky in two just overhead. Destroyer bolted in good earnest. Caspian was a good rider, but he had not the strength to hold him back. He kept his seat, but he knew that his life hung by a thread during the wild career that followed. Tree after tree rose up before them in the dusk and was only just avoided. Then, almost too suddenly to hurt, and yet it did hurt him too, something struck Caspian on the forehead, and he knew no more. When he came to himself, he was lying in a firelit place with bruised limbs and a bad headache. Low voices were speaking close at hand. "And now," said one, "before it wakes up, we must decide what to do with it." "Kill it," said another. "We can't let it live. It would betray us." "We ought to have killed it at once, or else let it alone," said a third voice. "We can't kill it now, not after we've taken it in and bandaged its head and all. It would be murdering a guest." "Gentlemen," said Caspian in a feeble voice, "whatever you do to me, I hope you will be kind to my poor horse." "Your horse had taken flight long before we found you," said the first voice, a curiously husky, earthy voice, as Caspian now noticed. "Now, don't let it talk you round with its pretty words," said the second voice. "I still say—" "Horns and halibuts!" exclaimed the third. "Of course we're not going to murder it. For shame, Nick-a-Brick. What do you say, Truffle Hunter? What shall we do with it?" "I shall give it a drink," said the first voice, presumably Truffle Hunter's. A dark shape approached the bed. Caspian felt an arm slip gently under his shoulders. If it was exactly an arm, the shape seemed somehow wrong. The face that bent towards him seemed wrong, too. He got the impression that it was very hairy and very long-nosed, and there were odd white patches on each side of it. "It's a mask of some sort," thought Caspian. "Or perhaps I'm in a fever and imagining it all." A cup full of something sweet and hot was set to his lips, and he drank. At that moment one of the others poked the fire. A blaze sprang up, and Caspian almost screamed with the shock as the sudden light revealed the face that was looking into his own. It was not a man's face, but a badger's, though larger and friendlier and more intelligent than the face of any badger he had seen before. And it had certainly been talking. He saw, too, that he was on a bed of heather in a cave. By the fire sat two little bearded men, so much wilder and shorter and hairier and thicker than Dr. Cornelius that he knew them at once for real dwarfs, ancient dwarfs with not a drop of human blood in their veins. And Caspian knew that he had found the old Narnians at last. Then his head began to swim again. In the next few days he learned to know them by names. The badger was called Truffle Hunter. He was the oldest and kindest of the three. The dwarf who had wanted to kill Caspian was a sour black dwarf. That is, his hair and beard were black and thick and hard like horsehair. His name was Nick-a-Brick. The other dwarf was a red dwarf, with hair rather like a fox's, and he was called Trumpkin. "And now," said Nick-a-Brick on the first evening when Caspian was well enough to sit up and talk, we still have to decide what to do with this human. You two think you've done it a great kindness by not letting me kill it, but I suppose the upshot is that we have to keep it a prisoner for life. I'm certainly not going to let it go alive, to go back to its own kind and betray us all." "Bulbs and bolsters, Nick-a-Brick," said Trumpkin. "Why need you talk so unhandsomely? It isn't the creature's fault that it bashed its head against a tree outside her hole, and I don't think it looks like a traitor." "I say," said Caspian, "you haven't yet found out whether I want to go back. I don't. I want to stay with you, if you'll let me. I've been looking for people like you all my life." "That's a likely story," growled Nick-a-Brick. "You're a Telmarine and a human, aren't you? Of course you want to go back to your kind." "Well, even if I did, I couldn't," said Caspian. "I was flying for my life when I had my accident. The king wants to kill me. If you'd killed me, you'd have done the very thing to please him." "Well now," said Truffle Hunter, "you don't say so." "Eh?" said Trumpkin. "What's that? What have you been doing, human, to fall foul of Miras at your age?" "He's my uncle," began Caspian, when Nick-a-Brick jumped up with his hand on his dagger. "There you are," he cried, "not only a Telmarine, but close kin and heir to our greatest enemy. Are you still mad enough to let this creature live?" He would have stabbed Caspian then and there if the badger and Trumpkin had not got in the way and forced him back to his seat and held him down. "Now, once and for all, Nick-a-Brick," said Trumpkin, "will you contain yourself, or must Truffle Hunter and I sit on your head?" Nick-a-Brick sulkily promised to behave, and the other two asked Caspian to tell his whole story. When he had done so, there was a moment's silence. "This is the queerest thing I ever heard," said Trumpkin. "I don't like it," said Nick-a-Brick. "I didn't know there were stories about us still told among the humans. The less they know about us, the better." That old nurse now, she'd better have held her tongue, and it's all mixed up with that tutor, a renegade dwarf. I hate him. I hate him worse than the humans. You mark my words. No good will come of it. Don't you go talking about things you don't understand, Knickerbrick, said Truffle Hunter. You dwarfs are as forgetful and changeable as the humans themselves. I'm a beast, I am, and a badger, what's more. We don't change. We hold on. I say great good will come of it. This is the true king of Narnia we've got here. A true king coming back to true Narnia. And we beasts remember, even if dwarfs forget, that Narnia was never right except when a son of Adam was king. Whistles and whirligigs, Truffle Hunter, said Trumpkin. You don't mean you want to give the country to humans? I said nothing about that, answered the badger. It's not men's country. Who should know that better than me? But it's a country for a man to be king of. We badgers have long enough memories to know that. Why, bless us all, wasn't the High King Peter a man? Do you believe all those old stories? Asked Trumpkin. I tell you, we don't change, we beasts, said Truffle Hunter. We don't forget. I believe in the High King Peter and the rest that reigned at Cair Paravel as firmly as I believe in Aslan himself. As firmly as that, I dare say, said Trumpkin. But who believes in Aslan nowadays? I do, said Caspian, and if I hadn't believed in him before, I would now. Back there among the humans, the people who laughed at Aslan would have laughed at stories about talking beasts and dwarfs. Sometimes I did wonder if there really was such a person as Aslan. But then, sometimes I wonder if there are really people like you. Yet, there you are. That's right, said Truffle Hunter. You're right, King Caspian, and as long as you will be true to old Narnia, you shall be my king, whatever they say. Long life to your majesty. You make me sick, Badger, growled Knickerbrick. The High King Peter and the rest may have been men, but they were a different sort of men. This is one of the cursed Telmarines. He has hunted beasts for sport, haven't you now? He added, rounding suddenly on Caspian. Well, to tell you the truth, I have, said Caspian, but they weren't talking beasts. It's all the same thing, said Knickerbrick. No, said Truffle Hunter. You know it isn't. You know very well that the beasts in Narnia nowadays are different and are no more than the poor, dumb, witless creatures you'd find in Kelmaren or Telmar. They're smaller, too. They're far more different from us than the half-dwarfs are from you. There was a great deal more talk, but it all ended with the agreement that Caspian should stay, and even the promise that, as soon as he was able to go out, he should be taken to see what Trumpkin called the others, for apparently in these wild parts all sorts of creatures from the old days of Narnia still lived on in hiding. Chapter 6. The People That Lived in Hiding. Now began the happiest times that Caspian had ever known. On a fine summer morning, when the dew lay on the grass, he set off for the badger and the two dwarfs, up through the forest to a high saddle in the mountains, and down on to their sunny southern slopes, where one looked across the green worlds of Archenland. We will go first to the three bulgy bears, said Trumpkin. They came in a glade to an old hollow oak tree covered with moss, and Truffle Hunter tapped with his paw 3 times on the trunk, and there was no answer. Then he tapped again, and a woolly sort of voice from inside said, Go away. It's not time to get up yet. But when he tapped the 3rd time, there was a small noise like a small earthquake from inside, and a sort of door opened, and out came 3 brown bears, very bulgy indeed, and blinking their little eyes. And when everything had been explained to them, which took a long time because they were so sleepy, they said, just as Truffle Hunter had said, that a son of Adam ought to be king of Narnia, and all kissed Caspian, very snuffly kisses they were, and offered him some honey. Caspian did not really want honey without bread at that time in the morning, but he thought it polite to accept. It took him a long time afterwards to get unsticky. After that, they went on until they came among tall beech trees, and Truffle Hunter called out, Patter twig, patter twig, patter twig. And almost at once, bounding down from branch to branch till he was just above their heads, came the most magnificent red squirrel that Caspian had ever seen. It was far bigger than the ordinary dumb squirrels which he had sometimes seen in the castle gardens. Indeed, it was nearly the size of a terrier, and the moment you looked in its face, you saw that it could talk. Indeed, the difficulty was to get it to stop talking, for, like all squirrels, it was a chatterer. It welcomed Caspian at once and asked if he would like a nut, and Caspian said thanks, he would, but as Pattertwig went bounding away to fetch it, Truffle Hunter whispered in Caspian's ear, Don't look. Look the other way. It's very bad manners among squirrels to watch anyone go into a store or to look as if you wanted to know where it was. Then Pattertwig came back with the nut, and Caspian ate it, and after that Pattertwig asked if he could take any messages to other friends. "For I can go nearly everywhere without setting foot to ground," he said. Truffle Hunter and the dwarfs thought this a very good idea, and gave Pattertwig messages to all sorts of people with queer names, telling them all to come to a feast and council on Dancing Lawn at midnight 3 nights ahead. "And you better tell the 3 Bulgies too," added Trumpkin. "We forgot to mention it to them." Their next visit was to the 7 brothers of Shuddering Wood. Trumpkin led them way back to the saddle, and then down eastward on the northern slope of the mountains till they came to a very silent place among rocks and fir trees. They went very quietly, and presently Caspian could feel the ground shake under his feet as if someone were hammering down below. Trumpkin went to a flat stone about the size of the top of a water butt and stamped on it with his foot. After a long pause, it was moved away by someone or something underneath, and there was a dark, round hole with a good deal of heat and steam coming out of it, and in the middle of the hole the head of a dwarf very like Trumpkin himself. There was a long talk here, and the dwarf seemed more suspicious than the squirrel or the bulgy bears had been, but in the end the whole party were invited to come down. Caspian found himself descending a dark stairway into the earth, but when he came to the bottom he saw firelight. It was the light of a furnace. The whole place was a smithy. A subterranean stream ran past on one side of it. 2 dwarfs were at the bellows. One was holding a piece of red-hot metal on the anvil with a pair of tongs. A 4th was hammering it. And 2, wiping their horny little hands on a greasy cloth, were coming forward to meet the visitors. It took some time to satisfy them that Caspian was a friend and not an enemy, but when they did, they all cried, "Long live the king!" and their gifts were noble, mail shirts and helmets and swords for Caspian and Trumpkin and Knickerbrick. The badger could have had the same if he had liked, but it said it was a beast, it was, and if its claws and teeth could not keep its skin whole, it wasn't worth keeping. The workmanship of the arms was far finer than any Caspian had ever seen, and he gladly accepted the dwarf-made sword instead of his own, which looked in comparison as feeble as a toy and as clumsy as a stick. The 7 brothers, who were all red dwarfs, promised to come to the feast at Dancing Lawn. A little further on, in a dry, rocky ravine, they reached the cave of 5 black dwarfs. They looked suspiciously at Caspian, but in the end the eldest of them said, "If he is against Mirez, we'll have him for king." And the next oldest said, "Shall we go further up for you, up to the crags? There is an ogre or 2 and a hag that we can introduce you to up there." "Certainly not," said Caspian. "I should think not indeed," said Truffle Hunter. "We would want none of that sort on our side." Knickerbrick disagreed with this, but Trumpkin and the badger overruled him. It gave Caspian a shock to realize that the horrible creatures out of the old stories, as well as the nice ones, had some descendants in Narnia still. "We should not have Caspian for our friend if we brought in that rabble," said Truffle Hunter as they came away from the cave of the black dwarfs. "Oh, Aslan," said Trumpkin, cheerily but contemptuously, "what matters much more is that you wouldn't have me." "Do you believe in Aslan?" said Caspian to Knickerbrick. "I'll believe in anyone or anything," said Knickerbrick, "that'll batter those cursed Telmarine barbarians to pieces and drive them out of Narnia. Anyone or anything. Aslan or the White Witch, do you understand?" "Silence! Silence!" said Truffle Hunter. "You do not know what you are saying. She was a worse enemy than Mirez and all his race." "Not to the dwarfs she wasn't," said Knickerbrick. Their next visit was a pleasanter one. As they came lower down, the mountains opened out into a great glen or wooded gorge with a swift river running at the bottom. The open places near the river's edge were a mass of foxgloves and wild roses, and the air was buzzing with bees. Here Truffle Hunter called again, "Glenstorm! Glenstorm!" And after a pause, Caspian heard the sound of hoofs. It grew louder till the valley trembled, and at last, breaking and trampling the thickets, there came in sight the noblest creature that Caspian had seen yet, the great centaur Glenstorm and his 3 sons. His flanks were glossy chestnut, and the beard that covered his broad chest was golden red. He was a prophet and a stargazer, and knew what they had come about. "Long live the king!" he cried. "I and my sons are ready for war. When is the battle to be joined?" Up till now, neither Caspian nor the others had really been thinking of a war. They had some vague idea, perhaps, of an occasional raid on some human farmstead, or of attacking a party of hunters if it ventured too far into these southern wilds. But in the main, they had thought only of living to themselves in woods and caves and building up an attempt at old Narnia and hiding. As soon as Glenstorm had spoken, everyone felt much more serious. "Do you mean a real war to drive Miraz out of Narnia?" asked Caspian. "What else?" asked the centaur. "Why else does your majesty go clad in mail and girt with sword?" "Is it possible, Glenstorm?" said the badger. "The time is ripe," said Glenstorm. "I watch the skies, badger, for it is mine to watch, it is yours to remember. Tarva and Allenbill have met in the halls of high heaven, and on earth the son of Adam has once more arisen to rule and name the creatures. The hour has struck. Our council at the dancing lawn must be a council of war." He spoke in such a voice that neither Caspian nor the others hesitated for a moment. It now seemed to them quite possible that they might win a war, and quite certain that they must wage one. As it was now past the middle of the day, they rested with the centaurs and ate such food as the centaurs provided: cakes of oaten meal, and apples, and herbs, and wine, and cheese. The next place they were to visit was quite near at hand, but they had to go a long way round in order to avoid a region in which men lived. It was well into the afternoon before they found themselves in level fields warmed between hedgerows. There, Truffle Hunter called at the mouth of a little hole in a green bank, and out popped the last thing Caspian expected: a talking mouse. He was of course bigger than a common mouse, well over a foot high when he stood on his hind legs, and with ears nearly as long as, though broader than, a rabbit's. His name was Reepy-Cheep, and he was a gay and martial mouse. He wore a tiny little rapier at his side and twirled his long whiskers as if they were a mustache. "There are 12 of us, sire," he said, with a dashing and graceful bow, "and I place all the resources of my people unreservedly at your majesty's disposal." Caspian tried hard, and successfully, not to laugh, but he couldn't help thinking that Reepy-Cheep and all his people could very easily be put in a washing basket and carried home on one's back. It would take too long to mention all the creatures whom Caspian met that day: Clodsley Shovel the Mole, the 3 Hardbiters, who were badgers like Truffle Hunter, Camillo the Hare, and Hogglestock the Hedgehog. They rested at last beside a well at the edge of a wide and level circle of grass, bordered with tall elms which now threw long shadows across it, for the sun was setting, the daisies closing, and the rooks flying home to bed. Here they slept on food they had brought with them, and Trumpkin lit his pipe. Nickabrick was not a smoker. "Now," said the badger, "if only we could wake the spirits of these trees in this well, we should have done a good day's work." "Can't we?" said Caspian. "No," said Truffle Hunter. "We have no power over them. Since the humans came into the land, felling forests and defiling streams, the dryads and naiads have sunk into a deep sleep. Who knows if they will ever stir again? And that is a great loss to our side. The Telmarines are horribly afraid of the woods, and once the trees moved in anger, our enemies would go mad with fright and be chased out of Narnia as quick as their legs would carry them." "What imaginations you animals have," said Trumpkin, who didn't believe in such things. "But why stop at trees and waters? Wouldn't it be even nicer if the stones started throwing themselves at old Miraz?" The badger only grunted at this, and after that there was such a silence that Caspian had nearly dropped off to sleep when he thought he heard a faint musical sound from the depth of the wood at his back. Then he thought it was only a dream and turned over again, but as soon as his ear touched the ground he felt or heard, it was hard to tell which, a faint beating or drumming. He raised his head. The beating noise at once became fainter, but the music returned, clearer this time. It was like flutes. He saw that Truffle Hunter was sitting up staring into the wood. The moon was bright. Caspian had been asleep longer than he thought. Nearer and nearer came the music, a tune wild and yet dreamy, and the noise of many light feet, till at last, out from the wood into the moonlight, came dancing shapes such as Caspian had been thinking of all his life. They were not much taller than dwarfs, but far slighter and more graceful. Their curly heads had little horns, the upper part of their bodies gleamed naked in the pale light, but their legs and feet were those of goats. "Fawns!" cried Caspian, jumping up, and in a moment they were all round him. It took next to no time to explain the whole situation to them, and they accepted Caspian at once. Before he knew what he was doing, he found himself joining in the dance. Trumpkin was with heavier and jerkier movements did likewise, and even Truffle Hunter hopped and lumbered about as best he could. Only Nickabrick stayed where he was, looking on in silence. The fawns footed all round Caspian to their reedy pipes. Their strange faces, which seemed mournful and merry all at once, looked into his. Dozens of fawns, Mentius and Obsentius and Drumnus, Volans, Voltinus, Duribus, Nimius, Gnossus, and Osens, Patatwig had sent them all. When Caspian awoke next morning, he could hardly believe that it had not all been a dream, but the grass was covered with little cloven hoof marks. And that's all for today. Thank you.